Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 35 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. We're back after a short break. I've been hooning my motorcycle around the mountains of the Pyrenees in northern Spain. And I'm joined today, as always, by my ever-faithful and omnipresent colleague, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Omnipresent, but not omniscient, I see.
Not omnipotent either. So, yeah. And only really omnipresent in the context of Logicast.
I am everywhere. I am the thing that haunts your nightmares. I don't know. That's really creepy.
So we're back after a couple of weeks hiatus. We have no guest today. Our guest is unfortunately otherwise indisposed. So it is just myself and John on the podcast today. What have you been up to since the last episodes, John?
Would you
Anything
believe
exciting?
plumbing?
More plumbing. My word. We should start a separate plumbing podcast.
Yeah, Plumcast, yeah. I had to refit a sink because my youngest, in his ineffable wisdom, leant on it a bit hard, ripped it half out the wall, so I had to refit a sink. That was fun.
Accidental or deliberate, do you think? The
Well,
leaning, not the refitting.
he's 4, so like somewhere in between that, I think.
It was an accident, Dad, honest.
Yeah, if he'd come to me and said that, I wouldn't have been anywhere near as angry as finding it after the fact.
Yes, that is the way that happens in my household too. I just find the damage. I never get informed about the damage. I have to conduct regular inspections and find what needs fixing. But anyway, we're not here to talk about plumbing or domestic damage. As regular listeners to the podcast will know, we are here to talk about AWS news. And some of this is perhaps not news because it's from my news roundup from 2 or 3 weeks ago prior to me going on leave. But we have got 5 news articles to talk to you about today. And the first one is from our regularly featured publication, InfoQ. And it's all about the introduction of a storage browser for S3. So I thought this already existed, if I'm honest, John. So enlighten me as to what's different about this particular storage browser for S3.
Okay, so it kind of existed already via the console. That's kind of what you're probably what you're thinking of. So in the console, you go to an S3 bucket, you click in the bucket, you can see what's in the bucket, but you need access to the AWS console to do that. And you might not want to give business people, say content writers, those sorts of people that want to put things into buckets, access to the console, because it's a bit intimidating if you're not an engineer. Because one of the things I've said over the years, and it's getting better, but the console has a face that only a mother could love because it's awful. It's horrendous. It's designed for a power user, is the point. It's designed for people like you and I that know what we're doing, where we're going, what we need to do. It's not designed to be particularly intuitive or user friendly. That's changing, that's improving, but that's kind of where it is. The other side of things is if you only want to give people access to one bucket, say, for uploading and downloading content for your content marketing or whatever, then giving them full AWS access is just another layer of stuff that you don't want to have to do. And the traditional way of dealing with this was using something like CyberDuck or FileZilla Pro, an FTP client that supports the S3 protocol, and creating access keys and secret keys, and then they just use their client. And that works, that's okay, but you're then giving access keys and secret keys, and they're going to be long-lived credentials, and they're big, ugly, and a bit scary again. And getting things to play nicely with S3 is hard work if you're not a technical person. You know, if you're just, I say just, if you're a content person, say, it's not your skill set. So it's a bit scary. What storage browser is, now this isn't something that AWS have quote released as a product or as a service. This is an open source. It's open source. It's an alpha release of an AWS Amplify project. Now Amplify is AWS's answer to Firebase, effectively, in that it will do, or GitLab Pages to a great extent. It will do hosting. There's a nice kind of 1 or 2 click command way of getting projects live, and it will host JavaScript and kind of all those sorts of bits and pieces. Brilliant. We like that. What this is doing is you can grant end users access to upload and download and read things from your bucket without having to do all of the other nonsense and shenanigans. And it works in exactly the same way that most people these days are used to, through a web browser. You can upload and download things from the bucket in a browser. Brilliant. Now, this is an alpha release, and it's not a service, and I don't think it will ever become a service, but this is really good for that sort of thing. It's just amplify, storage browser, those are dependencies, go deploy, done. And it's great. It works. It's lovely. And if you need, like I say, to give non-technical people access to upload and download things from S3 buckets, and you don't mind paying the amplify fees, I think they're pretty negligible. There you go, job done. Brilliant. And it's a lot easier than doing other stuff like I say, access keys, secret keys, or pre-signed URLs, which are really, really intimidating. It's just nice. It's great. I like it.
So why don't you think it will become a service then?
Well, because the service itself already exists. It's just S3, right? It's part of the S3 service. All this is doing is this is taking that and accelerating it outside of the console. And there's a number of services within AWS that work like this as well. Amplify being one of them, in that it has its own console, effectively. Lightsail's another, Beanstalk's another, in that it's got its own kind of mini console. But I don't think this is going to be a thing that you'd log into the AWS console to see and to use. This is always going to be something that sits outside of that world by design, because it's solving the problem of getting people access to your bucket without giving them access to the console.
I realised while you were talking that we had done a nice segue from sinks to buckets, both water carrying receptacles. Wasn't deliberate. Some people might think that we plan these things, but that's just a fortunate coincidence.
I barely plan
anyway.
what I have for breakfast. Jeez.
Whatever's left is what I have for breakfast. Whatever has not been eaten by the teenagers. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our second article for this week. And this is the announcement of new Graviton 4 powered memory optimized Amazon EC2 X8G instances. And this is obviously a big announcement because it's being made by Jeff Barr. So Jeff is obviously wheeled out for the bigger of the announcements that AWS wished to make. And we've spoken many times about Graviton on the podcast before, which is AWS's own custom silicon based on the ARM architecture. Is that right? Yes. But AWS's custom ARM silicon. And obviously, it started with Graviton, then it went to Graviton 2 very quickly, then to Graviton 3, and now we're up to the fourth generation of AWS's own ARM silicon. And this is a specific announcement around some memory optimized instances, the X8G instances, which are based on Graviton 4. So, thoughts on this, John? How quickly has this advanced, by the way? Can you remember? Doesn't feel like that long since we were talking about Graviton 3.
Well, part of the issue there, and I'm not going to answer the question in a brilliant political way, part of the issue there is we talk about Graviton 2, 3, and 4 kind of fairly regularly. We don't tend to talk about new service announcements, new EC2s, because I find them a bit dull. But I picked this as a segue into a bit of a whinge about this, if I'm really honest. Graviton 3 still isn't available for Lambda, as far as I know. That's still running on Graviton 2. So why are we talking about Graviton 4 instances being available in 3 very specific regions, North Virginia, Oregon, and Frankfurt, if you care, when Lambda, which is available everywhere, doesn't even have the previous generation? The sod 4, give me 3 everywhere. Let's start with that. Like this is a gripe I have fairly regularly with a number of different services. I have this gripe with Bedrock all the time, is this weird staggered rollout. And I get in this case, and to an extent Bedrock is probably the same, it's as much a logistics problem as a technical one, because you've just got to physically put the chips in places. That takes time. Fine. Okay. I don't care. I don't care about this. What I want is better global availability of the previous generation. Wonderful, brilliant. Thank you very much. You've done loads of great work. Fifth generation Nitro, it's got more more cache, it's got more this, that, and the other. It can have more memory per core, up to 16 gig per core, which is mad. But I don't care. I don't care. I want better adoption of the previous generation everywhere before you start rolling out the new one. And again, I get to an extent this is just an artifact of how chip manufacture works, because you've got to constantly be looking at the next one and the next one and the next one to keep up, because if you don't, everyone's going to run away with you. But until you have more consistent rollout and adoption of the previous version, it's just going to muddy the waters for me. I mean, these instances are great, and if you can use them and you need them, you already know who you are, and you're probably not listening to us recommend them. But it's just the waters are getting muddier and muddier and muddier, and it's going to turn into a USB problem. For the uninitiated, a USB problem is how many different versions of the USB protocol exist over one USB-C cable? There's about 6 now. So you can pick up a cable and it will do one thing or another, and you've got no idea until you plug it in, realistically, or you look at the packaging, because nobody ever does that. And it's going to turn into that problem again, where it's the water is going to become so muddy. It's Graviton. Oh, which version? Graviton 2.79 alpha. What?
Does it make a lot of difference to the way you write or deploy your applications?
Well, no, which is kind of fair, because if it works on Graviton 1, it will work on Graviton 4, because the chipset, the architecture is functionally the same. Like, it's all ARM. And again, for the uninitiated, ARM is just a way of interpreting instructions so that the CPU works in a certain way. That's all that is. And if it works on one version of ARM, it will work on another, within reason, right? Within reason. If it works on your Apple Silicon, it will work on a Graviton instance 99% of the time. Like, I've never seen that not work. The issue I have, as ever, is because of this really muddy water. If you look at the article itself, it says when compared to the previous generation, X2GD, the X8G instances offer 3 times more memory, 3 times more cores, twice as much bandwidth, twice as much network bandwidth. Okay, wonderful. So you're improving it in this specific region with a new set of servers. Okay, very nice. And I suppose that's kind of the point of the article. It's very nice, very good. Nice for you. Why can't I have that for my Lambdas in London, please?
Yeah, I suspect there's a number of factors at play. The existing servers won't have reached the end of their usable life yet. So, I was actually talking about this with a client this morning, that the usable life of servers is being extended now. I'm not sure what it is at AWS. Have they extended it to 6 or 7 years or something like that?
I saw something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe a long time before you see this sort of thing being rolled out into all services, because they're not going to simply trash all the existing servers that are running those services. But perhaps they could bolt some new servers onto the side of it and give you the option. But
and maybe that's why you see this weird phased rollout. Maybe it's in regions where they've got more space, because North Virginia, I don't know if you've ever been to Virginia, it's enormous. London, you've got very small amounts of room to play with. Rent is extortionate. It's hard to build things in London, because anywhere you dig, you find some sort of Roman artifact or a tube line or something. North Virginia, Oregon, loads of open space. Chuck a new data center in. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I haven't been to North Virginia, but I have been in US data centers, and they are massive compared to the UK ones that I've been in. We've got some pretty big ones in the UK as well, but nothing on the scale of what they build out there. So anyway, we digress. Let's move along from Graviton 4, which you're not impressed by at all, to another article.
Oh no, I'm impressed by the chipset, and the numbers that they put out are great. They really are. What I really get annoyed by is the inconsistent regional availability of things.
Fair enough. We're happy listening, AWS. So let's move on to our third article for this week. And this is an article from the AWS Cloud Operations blog. It's got quite a long title, so let's see if I can read it without my teeth falling out. 10 features for efficiently managing your AWS applications from Microsoft Teams and Slack using AWS Chatbot. And I read this one with interest because I thought it was pretty cool, actually, what you can now do from a ChatOps perspective from within your preferred chat client, whether it's Teams, which is not for us, or Slack, which it is for us. And I thought there's some pretty cool use cases in here. What did you think about this, John?
I thought it was interesting that they didn't say chime.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
That's it. That's the whole comment. No, I'm a big fan of chat. I'm a big fan of ChatOps. I really am. I spend far too much time wasting time in Slack anyway. The thing is, you're my manager. No, I don't. But, we've both worked in engineering organizations before where there's been whole channels dedicated to certain types of jokes or pictures of cats or whatever. Yeah. Big shout out to CloudReach, chat dad jokes. Oh, brilliant. Love that so much. Brilliant.
You wouldn't have this job if it wasn't for chat dad jokes.
No, I know. Once spent a whole day. I thought about this the other day actually. Once spent a whole day ruining band names by changing one letter.
Yeah.
And we can't say all of the names on here because we'll get not demonetized, but like YouTube will ban us. But I loved the Dankness, Lincoln Pork. Those are great.
Uh, anyway, on to ChatOps.
Yes, I spend a lot of my life in chat applications at the best of time, regardless of whether I'm meant to or not. And Slack has kind of lent into this really hard over the years. Teams is catching up, but Slack has lent into this really hard over the years. And they basically say, if at all possible, you shouldn't have to leave Slack to do what you need to do. If you get an alert in Slack, you should be able to respond to that alert in Slack. You should be able to raise support cases in Slack. You should be able to do anything and everything that you might need to do without having to go and open a browser, look at a console, open a terminal, log into a server, all those kind of things. If you can avoid doing those things and stay in your one chat application, which you've got open anyway, because let's face it, who doesn't? More better, because you don't have to do this kind of, there's a bit of a context switch, but you don't have to waste that 5-10 minutes getting kind of booted into whatever it is you need to look at. Great. Now, the 10 things that you can do through this, some of them are related to each other. And we do some of these things internally. And it's not just AWS that supports a number of these things. If you look at third-party providers, I'm thinking Datadog, I'm thinking PagerDuty, I'm thinking things like Pingdom and Status Cake, I'm thinking New Relic, I'm thinking those sorts of monitoring and third-party applications. Almost all of them will have a Slack integration in one form or another. PagerDuty's one is really good because you can, much like with some of these points that they're making, you can interrogate the alert and see what's going on without actually having to log in. So you can see, oh, here's what the graph is showing. Here's it's breached the threshold by this much. It's done this. It's done that. I can acknowledge things. I can resolve things. I can mute them. I can do brilliant, brilliant, because you don't have to log in and find the right place and deal with it. It's just there and it's done. It saves you loads of time, which is great. So it's not just AWS that's doing these things, just to be very clear. But here's some of the things you can do. So operate applications from teams. So this is talking about Q Developer, which is formerly Code Whisperer, now Q Developer, because it's got LLMs and stuff behind it, and you have to pay $25 per user, I think, for this. But the point is, you can talk to Q through Teams, and I assume Slack as well, and you can, just look at stuff, which is great. You can integrate with CloudWatch and this and that and the other, and look at stuff. Great, wonderful. What's the next one? You can chat to Q in chat channels. Great. So you don't have to open the console to have a conversation with Q to get answers about things or get it to raise support tickets or those sorts of things. Brilliant. We like that. We like that a lot. And the example they give is, how do I set concurrency settings? And it gives you the whole kind of answer at the docs, which is brilliant. What's the next one? CDK, SDK, Cloud Control APIs, and Terraform. Yep, cool. So you can basically configure Chatbot to do stuff for you with your IAC. Wonderful. That's full ChatOps to deployment and bits and pieces. So you can essentially say, deploy this thing for me, please, and it'll just do it. That's great. I like that a lot. That's really good for not so much for our customer base, but for people that are building like transient environments. So you can just issue a chat command, it goes off, it fires up the environment, builds it all, gives the credentials and whatever back to you. There you go, Mr. New Developer for a day. There's your environment. Wonderful. Like that so much. And it's also really useful for like pull request testing and that kind of thing. So again, you can just give me a pull request and build me an environment. And it's all just in chat, which is great. I like that. I like that a lot. Custom notifications. Now we do this internally with things like GuardDuty, Inspector, those sorts of things. A number of AWS services support just integrating directly with Chatbot. So you can subscribe Chatbot to your SNS topic, and then you can add Chatbot to the relevant channel in Slack or Teams. And because it's already using the right JSON schema, it goes, oh, okay, I know what this looks like. And you get this nice formatted message and pre-rolled options for integrating with things. And then you can add some custom things in there as well. And the example for the custom things is further down. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the idea is you could then write, say, a Lambda integration that you push a button in the message, it goes off, fires a Lambda, and then gives you the results back again. We like that because, again, you're able to do things to interrogate the problem in your chat without having to go and do it somewhere else. You haven't fired up a console. You haven't opened up a browser. You haven't done any of those sorts of things. You haven't opened a terminal. You've just got it there in front of you, which just speeds things up enormously.
Have you noticed the recurring banana theme today? Normally it's
Yeah.
unicorns in these the
I wonder if we're
example
going to get some new
businesses.
stickers.
Because there was a banana folder in the S3 storage browser
Yes, there
article
was.
that we discussed, and here we're talking about failure of dropping banana orders. So yeah, not quite sure why we've gone from unicorns to bananas as the example organisations in these.
Well, I mean, you
In
feed
these
horses
posts.
carrots. Do you feed unicorns bananas?
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we shall
I
have to ask someone at reInvent.
Oh yeah. Speaking of, I mean, one of the funny things about the unicorns is there's loads of unicorn stickers. I've got a couple on my Mac, and I've given a couple to the kids. Cool. I wonder if we're going to get some banana stickers now. Maybe that's the preview.
Maybe. We've got pizza stickers. I'm just actually looking at the back of my laptop at the moment. We've got unicorns, we've got pizzas and beer. Don't have any bananas. So yeah, maybe we'll get banana stickers this year. It'll be, keep our eyes peeled for those. See what I did there? Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
back to the subject of ChatOps.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, the next one is
Well,
look
the
at
next one was actually the most interesting one to me. When I was reading the article, I thought this was pretty
because
cool.
it's a drop in CPU utilization for your banana dashboard.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, this is much the same as you see with people like Datadog and PagerDuty. This is you can look at dashboards in chat. So dashboards are really, really useful for just getting a view of what's going on with your system, whether it's in an emergency incident alert scenario or just kind of generally. And back in the day when people worked in offices, and I certainly have built these, you'd put a dashboard of your system health on a big screen in the corner of the office where everybody could see it, so everybody knew what was going on. And it wasn't I can't talk to you right now. There's a massive production incident going on. People would wander over and then they'd see the board and they'd walk away again because they knew you were doing something and you were busy. And that's great. And particularly in supporting non-prod environments, again, having a dashboard is less common, but it was useful because you could wander into the office at 8:30 in the morning or whatever, see, oh, that system's not come up. Okay. And then you know the thing that you need to go and poke first. Really handy. Obviously, we don't have that now because I'm not putting a telly of dashboards in my office in my house because it's not that. But having them in chat again is great because I'm going to open chat, I'm going to see them. Great, wonderful. I can monitor things, I can look at things as they're going along.
Can't you
Wonderful.
just use one section of your enormous new monitor for dashboards? You've got the
The
screen
irony.
real estate now.
I do. It's the same as to be fair, it's not massive. It's the same as two 27s next to each other. Again, for the listeners, you can't see it, and I'm not moving my camera because I'm not showing you the rest of my office. But I treated myself to an ultra wide monitor, so I have a ridiculously large monitor. That's not actually that ridiculous. It's the same as two 27 inches, which is like okay, that's not that weird. It's just a bit obscene because it's one screen,
Curved.
curved. It
Like
have
a
to be curved.
banana.
It's about the same sort of curve as a banana, actually. Looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh dear. But no, that's never going to happen. So again, it's in chat. Wonderful. I can look at these things. Next thing, looking at log data. Log data is awful, but it's the same sort of thing. Rather than metrics, this is logs. So you can query your logs directly from chat. Great. Wonderful. Run frequently used tasks. Again, directly from chat. Great. Wonderful. None of these things are bad. Customize action buttons. Now, this is a bit of a stretch because they actually showed you in one of the earlier screenshots a custom action button that they'd written. So it's not like an extra thing. It's like a sub thing. But again, this is what I was talking about earlier. You can run a custom action because you've written things and you can just kind of do it from chat. Search your resources and using tags. Okay, those are kind of, I wouldn't call them things in their own right. It feels like they stretched 6 things into 10 to get to an even 10, but none of these are bad. All of these are quite cool. And the more you can do in chat, I think the better because you're going to have it open anyway. People are needy and you need to talk to other people once in a while. So the more things you can do in the one place, the better.
Absolutely. Chat taking over from the browser. Unless, of course, you're running your chat client in your browser. So, anyway. So, on that note, let's move on from curved monitors and bananas to an article on the AWS security blog, which is all about getting to know Amazon GuardDuty runtime monitoring for EC2. So, GuardDuty, an important tool for many of our customers. Runtime monitoring, I think, was a relatively new feature, which we discussed several episodes back. So, this, I guess, is a little bit of a deeper dive on the new runtime monitoring feature for EC2. So tell us your thoughts on this, John.
It's an interesting kind of look at what's going on, because when we've spoke about it before, we were talking about, oh, brilliant, now you can do runtime monitoring, but it's not a full replacement for like a SOC SIEM agent. It's kind of showing you what they're doing now, which is interesting. It's doing things like collecting information about common operating system commands, so curl, which is the download one for non-techies, system control, cron, which is what you use for scheduling, bits and pieces like that, which is really handy. Systemctl, system control, is what you use on a Linux machine to control whether something's running at boot or not, basically. So it's running as a service, which means it'll just come up and it'll run. You can interact with it like a background. It's not something that you specifically opened. So collecting service information is absolutely vital, because you need that, because it's a great thing to do, is to install something as a service, as a running as a sort of a sneaky user that you're not really going to see, and it'll hide away there. So monitoring systemctl is pretty key, which is good. I like to see that. It's also talking about event correlation, which is great, because if you can correlate events from lots of different sources, so you've got your runtime monitor, you've got your other bits that GuardDuty is doing from your flow logs or for your CloudTrail, and you can kind of say, oh, something happened between here to here to here to here to here, and then that's the result, and then here's the problem that I've seen. Wonderful. I've now done a full track back and I've found everything. Great. Love that a lot. That helps. That's one of the big advantages of integrated tools. It's why we kind of like Datadog as well for the application, for the infrastructure side of things, because you can correlate metrics at the same kind of point in time really easily, and that makes incident remediation really a lot less stressful, because you get lots of data very quickly. We like that. It then talks about the finding types. I'm not going to go into them because there's 41 of them, but the but the 5 new ones, which are worth talking about because they list them out specifically, is suspicious tool and suspicious command. So, why are you running that? That's weird. You shouldn't be running that. That looks odd. That looks like it might be a crypto miner. Those kinds of things. And then defense evasion for suspicious command. So you could be running a command that makes it that is used to evade kind of tracking and things. Cool, wonderful. Anti-debugging, which is again, if you're doing things to turn debugging, messaging, and whatever off, it's an evasion. And then the last one is a malicious file has been executed. So all of these are things that you'd kind of see from a normal antivirus, realistically. Which is good. We like this. We like this a lot. Anything that can reduce your dependency on third-party AV solutions, if you do need such a thing, is good. I mean, we operate them. We like them, but it's one of those things that if you can have all of your data kind of in one place, that's always going to be better. So if you're running, say, an external AV provider, and I'm not going to call them out, but if you run an external AV provider and then a different sort of posture management and then GuardDuty, your data's just in lots of different places, and that's hard. That's hard work. If it's all in one place, great. And GuardDuty is largely going to be cheaper than a third-party SOC SIEM solution that includes all of this. Great. It's not a replacement for a SOC SIEM solution by any measure, but it is getting that way, I feel.
Cool.
Yeah, and then it's kind of more of the same, and then it talks about responses and speed to detection, which is sort of what we've spoken about already. And it's definitely worth going and looking at this article if it's something that you think you might need, which basically anyone that doesn't already have a half decent security solution in place probably needs to think about this.
Nice. Okay. We like GuardDuty runtime monitoring. So on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week, which is all about, and let me read the title first. The title is AWS open source Brouhaha about Elasticsearch takes another turn. I'm not sure if you picked this one just because you wanted me to have to say Brouhaha on the podcast, but we have spoken about this Brouhaha on a number of occasions, which is the ongoing spat between AWS and Elastic over the open sourcing of the Elasticsearch application. For want of a
Yeah,
better
I
word.
mean, I don't think it's ongoing anymore per se because Elasticsearch is an AWS partner, big tier partner, kind of all the rest of it. I'm not going to go through the article in great detail because it's only like a page or two long. It's go read it. Realistically, I'm just going to kind of talk to the history of this a little. Talk about the history of this a little bit. I really need to catch myself doing that. I'm not American. Don't like that. Don't like that. But I'm just going to talk about the history on this a little bit. Because it is an interesting one, and this kind of shows the interplay between AWS and its partner ecosystem, and when things don't always go kind of the way that people want them to. So, right. Back in the day, Elasticsearch, the Elastic company, Elastic, created Elasticsearch and the Elastic Stack, the ELK stack, which is a number of things that support Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is just a managed search provider, effectively. You put data in it and you can search it. It's time series data and JSON and kind of all that sort of thing. Common things to send to it, things like log data, metric data. That's what the ELK stack is about. That's Logstash, sending logs to it. And then you could visualize it as well. And they had an open source version, which is just Elastic. And they had a pro version, a paid for version, which was the X pack, the extension pack, which was, you paid for that. And it gave you a number of nice extra things. Cool, wonderful. Like that a lot. AWS were running a managed service hosting the open source version of Elastic because one of the terms of XPack was you weren't allowed to host it. You could host it on-prem and run it for yourselves, but you couldn't resell it. Like that was one of the drivers to get people to pay for Elastic Cloud to get Elastic to do that for them. So AWS couldn't do that, so they didn't. They hosted just the open source version, and that was annoying to an extent because if you wanted some of the XPack features, you couldn't have them. And it was one of those, if you asked an account manager or an SDM or whoever at the time at AWS, it was, we're working on that. We're off the record, we're working on that. That's on the roadmap somewhere. On the record, sorry, I can't comment. But it was one of those sorts of things where they build around it in the wider service to support the things that, under the terms of the license, they couldn't support using XPack. Cool, wonderful. Elastic kind of took the hump with this, I think, to a great extent, and they changed the license of Elasticsearch specifically to prevent people from hosting the open source version for other people. So they changed it. It was no longer open source. It was then the business source license, which effectively meant the only people that were allowed to sell hosted Elasticsearch were Elastic. And that kind of blew everything up in everybody's faces and it sort of made a lot of noise and a lot of mess. AWS, as a result of this, forked the last open source version of Elasticsearch, made OpenSearch, and started hosting OpenSearch because then they were able to do that. And really, that should have been the end of the story, but it turns out it isn't. So in more recent months, Elastic put out another post saying that they're now open source again. And it's not quite the same open source license. It was either MIT or Apache that they were using before, which for the uninitiated, the MIT license is basically do whatever you want, but we're not responsible for anything that you do. And the Apache license is kind of similar, but it's you must attribute the original like owner of the work effectively to say that, but you can do whatever you want and we're not going to give you any support. I don't know what the new license is, but it's not quite that open. It's more open than it was, and I still think calling it open source is a bit of a stretch. Fine, whatever. Moving on, AWS have now gifted, in the way that these things are, the OpenSearch project to the Linux Foundation. And various things have been gifted to various open source foundations over the past X number of years and decades. The obvious ones being things like Google created Kubernetes and then gave it to the CNCF. I think Hadoop is now an open source project owned by Apache Foundation, and so on and so on. There's loads of this. A company will come up with something, they will build it, run it for a bit, and then they will gift it to some open source foundation or other. And that's essentially what's happened here. Is the history of Elastic known and storied. OpenSearch has now been gifted to the Linux Foundation. I don't know whether this is in response to the whole Elastic thing, and whether we're going to start to see hosted Elasticsearch on AWS again or not, I don't know. I don't particularly care. It would be it'd be an interesting turnaround, because there'd be just a whole chunk of Elasticsearch versions that you wouldn't be allowed to use. But then you could use this really old one or this new one if that happens. Whether it will or not, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know whether it's in response to that or whether it's in response to some of the flack that cloud providers more generally have been getting about their taking advantage of open source projects, because that, again, I think was Elastic's kind of one of their gripes back in the day, was it's an open source project, you're taking advantage of this. Please stop it. So
yeah, AWS have been criticised of that on a number of occasions, and I think they're going to great lengths now to counter that criticism and make a big song and dance about the contributions that are being made back to the open source community by AWS engineers. So, but there we are. There we have it. On that note, we have reached the end of our time for this week's episode, season 3, episode 35 of Logicast. So if you're still listening, thank you for making it this far. Thank you, John, for your insights as always. We will be back next week with another episode of Logicast, hopefully with a guest. We have got a great pipeline of guests booked in for future episodes of the podcast right through until the early new year. So we look forward to bringing you more members of the AWS community to share their insights on the Logicast podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please tell your friends. You can download us from wherever you download your podcasts. And if you'd like to look at the funny faces that we're pulling, we're also available to watch on YouTube. John is giving you some lovely reactions there. So you'll have to look on YouTube for John exercising his Apple reactions. But on that note, that is all we have time for. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time.